This podcast contains descriptions of violence against children and adult language and is not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Hi everyone, and welcome to the first Patreon bonus minisode of Suffer the Little Children, the true crime podcast, giving voices back to the victims of child abuse and shining a harsh spotlight on the parents, guardians, and caretakers who silence them. I'm your host, Laine, and this is bonus minisode number 1, Keigan O'Brien. An adorable 2-year-old boy described by loved ones as a cheeky monkey is dead, murdered just days after his 2nd birthday, and his older sisters are left wondering why their beloved baby brother never came home. This is a tragic story out of England that I covered in November of 2020 on sufferthelittlechildrenblog.com. My sources for this minisode were the South Yorkshire Police, Yorkshire Examiner Live, the Doncaster Free Press, Metro, Brooklyn's Angels on Facebook, The Star, The Sun, the Yorkshire Post, Named and Shamed UK on Facebook, ITV, Daily Motion, and the Daily Mail. At 10:55 a.m. on Wednesday, January 8, 2020, a couple in Doncaster, a town of almost 110,000 people in South Yorkshire, England, called 999, England's emergency number, requesting emergency services for the woman's 2-year-old son, who they said was not breathing. First responders rushed to the couple's home on Bosworth Road in Doncaster's Adwick area, where they found the little boy in cardiac arrest and close to death. Police, who were the first to arrive, performed CPR on little Keigan O'Brien until paramedics arrived minutes later and were able to resuscitate him. Keigan was rushed to the hospital, but despite the most valiant efforts of medical staff, the child did not survive his injuries. Just 2 days after celebrating his 2nd birthday with a trip to a huge indoor playground called Flip Out, Keigan Ronnie O'Brien was pronounced dead on January 9, 2020, at 2 years and 3 days old. A post-mortem examination of Keigan's battered little body, which was conducted on the evening of his death, found that Keigan died from a catastrophic head injury, causing irreversible brain damage. But that was far from the only trauma he had suffered. He had also endured a spinal fracture between 6 and 16 weeks prior to his death, in addition to rib fractures sustained 2 to 4 weeks prior, as well as bleeding on his brain weeks to months before he died. As if that wasn't enough, Keigan's arm was also fractured due to twisting at about the same time as his fatal head injury, and according to medical evidence, the force that caused the fatal injury to this baby's head was deemed consistent with the force associated with crush injuries to the skull, falls from a height, and traffic collisions. At the time of this injury, Keigan was in the care of a man named Martin James Curry, who had dated Keigan's mother, Sarah O'Brien, for about 6 months. Sarah was out of the house at the time, dropping her 2 older daughters off at school. According to prosecutor Jason Pitter, QC, the story wasn't quite as innocuous as Sarah and Martin would have police believe. Evidence produced at the couple's trial, which took place over 5 weeks in October and November of 2020, revealed that Martin had spent some time on the internet 2 hours before he and Sarah called 999, searching terms such as irregular breathing, being unconscious, and gurgling. One of the results that came up during Martin's searches was agonal breathing, which explicitly instructed the reader to seek immediate medical help. Agonal breathing is the type of gasping reflex breathing that people do when a medical emergency such as cardiac arrest or brain damage causes them to struggle to breathe. It is not actually breathing, it's a brainstem reflex that can be considered a sign of death. These searches clearly indicated that Keigan was injured well before 999 was called at nearly 11 a.m., and that Martin was well aware of the fact. Both 36-year-old Martin Curry and 32-year-old Sarah O'Brien were charged on the evening of Friday, January 10, 2020, and seen separately the following morning in Doncaster Magistrates Court, after which both were taken into custody. During the hearings, each defendant spoke only to confirm their name, age, and address, and confirm they understood their charges. Sarah sobbed throughout her hearing. Shortly after Keigan's death, his 34-year-old aunt, Katie, told The Sun online, "It's heartbreaking what happened. We just can't believe it. And his gran is beside herself with grief. We're all so shocked." Katie, who was caring for her sister's surviving daughters, said, "My 4-year-old niece keeps asking when her little brother will be back. It is utterly heartbreaking." Katie told the Mirror that she received a text from her sister, Sarah, on the day of Keigan's injury, telling her Keigan wasn't breathing. Katie said the last time she saw her nephew was during his birthday celebration at Flip Out. "He was having a great time. Then in the afternoon, when the kids were back from school, we had a tea party for him at his home. It was good fun. He was dancing around the place. He's such a happy little lad, but that's the last time I saw him." After Keigan's death, someone left 2 bouquets of flowers outside the family's home, where a happy second birthday banner was still visible in the front window. Neighbors were shocked by the incident. Mark Hillary told Metro, "It's shocking that this happened to such a young boy. I'm devastated this happened. I just can't believe it." Neighbor David Brown told The Sun Online, "A woman was sitting on the curb outside crying her eyes out and totally distraught. There was an air ambulance hovering overhead, and suddenly 8 to 10 police cars swooped on the street. Next thing, the couple had disappeared, taken into a police car, and the boy was taken off by ambulance, not the air ambulance. We can't believe this happened on our doorsteps. It's shocking. We hadn't heard any disturbance. The woman has only moved into the house with her kids last summer. She has 2 older daughters. She's a single mom. We never saw the dad around, and she always seemed very pleasant but kept to herself. She recently had a new partner on the scene." On the evening of January 11, 2020, a candlelight vigil and a balloon release were held in Keigan's memory. Sheffield Crown Court heard at the beginning of the couple's trial, which began on October 6, 2020, that Keigan's head injury likely resulted from his head being smashed into a hard surface, such as the wall or the floor. During trial, the court heard that Sarah and Martin had previously referred to Keigan as wank stain and shithead. On one occasion, Martin was reportedly seen manhandling Keigan, yelling, "Stop moaning, you little bastard." Also brought up at trial was the fact that Sarah had been warned not to date Martin in an incident in October of 2019, when Sarah did not seek medical attention for Keigan after he suffered 2 black eyes while in Martin's care. During that incident, prosecutors explained, Sarah told a friend her son had fallen down the stairs, saying she didn't take him to the hospital because they will start asking questions. In early December of 2019, Keigan was seen with fading bruises on either side of his face, consistent with the grip marks of a large hand. Similar bruises also appeared on his face after the fatal attack. Judge Mrs. Justice Jennifer Eady, who oversaw the trial, said, "Such bruising paints a picture of how Keigan was handled, forcibly gripped around the face." A search of the family's home turned up blood spatters on the wall by Keigan's high chair, although this evidence, according to prosecutors, was not left during the incident that caused Keigan's death, but instead from one of the countless prior incidents of abuse against the helpless toddler, and likely caused by a blow to Keigan's face. These past assaults, the judge later said, set the scene for Martin's eventual fatal brutalizing of the little boy. Blood spatters were also found on Martin's clothing. Testimony heard during the trial informed the court that Keigan was hospitalized near the end of 2019 for his fractured ribs and spine, which the court decided could only have been caused by someone stomping or kneeling on the little boy's chest. Of course, each defendant attempted to blame the other, which is common in cases like these. Sarah's defense attorney, Catherine Goddard QC, argued that her client called 999 as soon as she returned home from dropping her daughters off at school and found Keigan lying on his bedroom floor. She said Martin performed CPR before police arrived. Martin's defense attorney, Christopher Torani QC, said Martin confronted Sarah when he found Keigan much earlier that morning, telling her he was prepared to create a story to save her. Martin told the court he would never hit a child, saying he never struck Keigan and was once in love with Sarah. Detective Chief Inspector James Axe of the South Yorkshire Police said, "This trial has been incredibly hard for Keigan's family, and I would like to thank them for their support in assisting our investigation. During the trial, O'Brien and Curry have shown no remorse for the death of Keigan. O'Brien has denied having any knowledge of how Keigan sustained his injuries, with the exception of an incident where Keigan suffered a head injury and black eyes. O'Brien stated he fell down the stairs. Curry stated he didn't know how Keigan came about his injuries, but told the court how he heard O'Brien assaulting Keigan previously but had not witnessed it. Curry admitted to finding Keigan on the morning of 8 January at around 9 a.m. He thought Keigan was dead. Keigan did not receive medical assistance for nearly 2 hours when O'Brien finally called Yorkshire Ambulance Service at 10:57 a.m. This gave the pair sufficient time to formulate a series of lies and devise a story which was an attempt to cover the true circumstances that had unfolded. The only 2 people responsible for Keigan's death are O'Brien and Curry, 2 people who should have loved and cared for him. In fact, they should have been the very people who protected little Keigan above all else." On Tuesday, November 10, 2020, Sarah O'Brien was acquitted of murder, but she was convicted on the alternative charges of child cruelty and causing or allowing the death of a child. She was sentenced on November 11th to 8 years, 4 of which she will serve in prison and 4 on license, which is a form of temporary parole allowing a person to leave prison to make arrangements for their release, including spending time at their release address, maintaining family ties, making arrangements for accommodation, and for work or training upon release. While handing down Sarah's sentence, Judge Eady said, The jury found that you were aware, or ought to have been aware, of the risk of serious physical harm posed to Keigan by Martin Curry. At the very least, you failed to protect Keigan, leaving him with Martin Curry to be subjected to the very significant force used in the incident that led to his death. She did, however, accept that Sarah was a woman with low self-esteem, and was therefore vulnerable to the affections of a man like Martin. You've lost your son forever, and have been separated from your daughters. Your culpability does not retract from that. Martin Curry was found guilty of both murder and child cruelty and sentenced to life in prison, of which he must serve a minimum of 22 years before being considered for release. The minimum sentence for these charges is 23 years, but Judge Edie said she was prepared to make some deductions because she was satisfied that Martin had not intended to kill Keigan and that Keigan's death was not premeditated. She did, however, add that any mitigating factor only goes so far when considered against the chronic and vicious abuse Keigan suffered. The judge described Keigan in words she took from his family, saying he was a beautiful little boy and a happy and affectionate child. His grandmother said he was a cuddly little baby who loved snuggles and hugs. Saying she was mindful of the utter tragedy that Keigan's death represents for this family, Judge Edie said his sister's pain will be all the more acute, as they must now live with the reality that their mother allowed their baby brother's death by ignoring not only warnings but imminent threat against Keigan's well-being in the form of Martin Curry. Judge Edie said at sentencing that Martin was guilty of the violent murder of a blameless 2-year-old. These offenses involved the grossest abuse of a position of trust. You placed yourself in the role of Keigan's father. Your duty was to protect him. Instead, you abused, injured, and killed him. The judge said that prior to Martin's arrival in Sarah's life, there was no apparent cause for concern, no prior contact with social services, and her children were generally healthy. When Martin came along, things seemed fine at first, even though he was a recovering heroin addict. Judge Edie said to him, "You helped Sarah with household chores and brought a degree of stability to the home." Soon after he moved in, though, Martin began treating the kids with contempt, and Sarah eventually began doing the same. Judge Edie mentioned an incident in which the couple locked Keigan in his bedroom and adjusted the door handle so he couldn't escape. Calling Martin's explanation for Keigan's injuries a pack of lies, Judge Edie said to the convicted murderer, "Although you've not seen fit to tell the truth about what happened on the morning of January 8, 2020, it seems that after Sarah left the house to take her daughters to school, Keigan disrupted you in bed watching porn on your phone." Then, she said, apparently triggered by a fit of temper, Martin attacked Keigan, who Martin then threw back into his bed and left him to bleed on his pillow, while the man returned to gambling and looking at porn on his phone. The gaps between Martin's internet searches, Judge Edie said, were chilling because they told the story of his panic about Keigan's condition, but complete inactivity in seeking help for the dying boy, who, Judge Edie said, Martin ignored for hours until he was found floppy and cold. Judge Edie admonished Martin, "At no point did you take the most obvious step to call the emergency services." Also, the judge said, during the gap between the searches and the 999 call, Martin tried contacting his drug dealer to obtain heroin in what she described as a pathetic sign of self-absorption. Jill Brooks of the CPS said after the trial, "Tragically, little Keigan O'Brien's life came to an end only 4 days after his 2nd birthday. He was killed in his own home, the place where he should have been safest from harm. Having heard all the evidence, the jury decided that Curry inflicted fatal injuries on the defenseless little boy, and O'Brien took no steps to protect her child. They both then lied about what happened. The pair are now facing lengthy prison sentences." A review of Keigan's case is underway to determine if his death could have been prevented. Rihanna Nelson, Director of Learning, Opportunities and Skills at Doncaster Council, said, "This is a deeply sad and distressing case, and our thoughts are with Keigan's family and those who loved him. A partnership review is currently underway, and all the findings will be published in due course. All partners are committed to fully understanding the circumstances around this tragic event, and once the full review has been published, we will be able to provide further detailed comment." A fundraiser started by a man named Stuart Denman brought in more than £4,500 to pay for Keigan's funeral and help support his older sisters. Stuart said, "He had just turned 2 and had his life cut short in very sad circumstances. He will have been still learning to talk and play. The life he should have had, full of happiness, smiles, and laughter, has gone just like that. We all know funerals are free but are only the basic package, which is great, but he deserves the best. The ones who are suffering the most are Keigan's sisters. Blink of an eye and their world has fallen to bits." On January 30th, 2020, a family spokesperson said, "Thank you for all of the fundraising that has been done for Keigan. It is a very difficult time for us, and we appreciate everyone's time and efforts, especially Stuart Denman for all his hard work. As a family, we are still dealing with this situation the best we can, and while we are incredibly appreciative of everyone's kind words and support, we would like to maintain our privacy and ask that it's respected as we try to come to terms with what has happened. Keigan's funeral took place on March 20th, 2020 in Doncaster. Keigan was buried in a Paw Patrol-themed coffin. His father, wearing a blue tie, walked behind the coffin as pallbearers carried it into the cemetery. Other close relatives and friends also wore blue ties or scarves in honor of Keigan's favorite color. Some carried blue flowers. The 30-minute service was private at the family's request, attended by about 50 people, but the press was able to see the solemn procession into the cemetery and to overhear some of the little guy's favorite songs being played. Prior to the funeral, Keigan's family said in a statement, "Keigan was a beautiful, happy, funny, cheeky, mischievous little boy. He was only with us for 2 short years, but in this time, he brought happiness to his family and friends who loved him very much. Today we will celebrate his short life and the joy he brought to his dad, siblings, grandparents, auntie and uncle, and not to focus on the circumstances that have led to his death. He loved Paw Patrol, and he loved to dance to the song Dance Monkey by Tones and I, and Memories by Maroon 5. We will miss him every day for the rest of our lives. We will never forget Keigan. Fly high with the angels, little man." A family friend described the little blonde boy as lovely and always cheerful, saying, "He would be laughing and giggling at you. He wasn't a shy child and was interested in everything." Keigan's biological father, who has not been named, said after the trial in a statement issued by police, "Keigan was such a special little boy. He was lovable, playful, energetic, and full of fun. He will always have a place in our hearts and will be missed terribly. He will never be forgotten, and we are truly heartbroken. Rest well, Keigan." That's it for this Patreon-exclusive bonus minisode. Thanks again for your support. If you like the show, please follow or subscribe to Suffer the Little Children on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, YouTube, Spotify, Spreaker, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast listening app. And please leave me a 5-star rating and a positive review on your favorite podcast platform. Visit the website at sufferthelittlechildrenpod.com. You can support the show by visiting patreon.com/stlcpod, where you can become a patron for rewards ranging from a shout-out by name on the show to bonus content and exclusive gifts. You can also support the show at ko-fi.com/stlcpod. Follow the podcast on Facebook and Instagram at Suffer the Little Children Pod and on TikTok at STLCpod. View photos related to today's episode on Facebook. This podcast is researched, written, hosted, edited, and produced by Laine. Intro theme music is by Dreamnote Music, and all music for the show is licensed from audiojungle.net. For more information about preventing or reporting child abuse, visit childhelp.org or call your area's child abuse hotline. And remember, if you see something, say something.